All right, in this module, we'll begin our exploration of the multi-index, which is exactly as it sounds. It basically switches things up, and instead of having a single index like we've had throughout this entire course, we're going to have a multi-layered index. It may have multiple levels or multiple layers. And what that allows you to do is basically more effectively categorize your data and kind of store it in sequential buckets, so to speak. In addition to the multi-index, this module will also dive into some transposition and manipulation operations, things like pivot tables, things like reverse pivot tables, which basically means taking a summarized or aggregated view of data and converting it back to pivoted data, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of fun stuff to dive in here. Sometimes it's easier to see in practice than it is to put into words. But let's begin by creating a brand new Jupyter Notebook. So I'm going to click New and select my Conda root environment. Let's call our Jupyter Notebook multi-index, although the lessons here may extend past that simple concept. Let's also import our pandas library as PD. Let's create some cells below here by holding the B key in command mode. And now let's take a look at our data set. So once again, it's stored in a CSV file, so I'm going to call the read CSV method. And this time, we're going to be using a file called bigmac.csv. So let's take a look. So this is kind of an interesting data set. There is something called the Big Mac Index, apparently, among economists, and the average price of a Big Mac, which is the most popular menu item at McDonald's, is actually used as a fairly effective economic indicator of a country's economic performance. So the price of a very common good is usually a very good indicator of things like a country's, I don't know, it's like GDP or its future growth, that kind of stuff. So a Big Mac actually offers a fairly remarkable economic indicator of a country's economic health. Now, unfortunately, we all know that the Big Mac is the inferior sandwich compared to the Burger King Double Whopper, but unfortunately, there was no Double Whopper economic index, so we have to stick with Big Macs. But anyway, what we have here is basically a 3-column data frame. We have the date, which is basically the month that the data was collected. We have the country, and then we have the price in US dollars of a Big Mac in that country. So for example, the price of a Big Mac in Argentina in January 2016 was $2.39. So there's one thing I want to do here just to optimize things a little bit. I want to use my familiar parse dates parameter. You may recall that from maybe a few modules ago. And what it accepts is a list of column names. In this case, I'm just going to pass date, which is my very first column. And it's going to convert those values in that column to date-time objects. The advantage for this is just flexibility. Right now it's being imported as a string, and we want to guarantee that dates are properly represented as date-time objects because those kinds of objects give it the most flexibility. We can actually do date-time operations like subtract days, add days, find out durations, find out distances, find out the month or the week or the day of the year that something occurred. We may not ever have to need to do this, for example, in this lesson, but it's always a good idea to store data in the data type that it's meant to be stored at. And this really is a date. It's not a string. It's not just a bunch of random characters. So I want to make sure when we import this that it's going to be treated as a date. Other than that, I think we're all good. So we can assign this to a variable. I'm going to use Big Mac. And I'm going to preview the first 3 rows with the head method. And just to conclude, I'm going to call our familiar dtypes attribute just to confirm everything looks good. And we can see we have our 3 columns. Our date column is being stored as date-time objects. Our country column is strings, which is indicated by object. And our price column is being stored as floating point numbers, which is proper. We also have that familiar info method, which is basically a bit more of a comprehensive view of both the data types as well as the memory usage and things like that. It doesn't look like this data set has any null values, so we won't have to worry about that. But other than that, this will be our import code at the beginning of every single lesson, and we'll start diving into creating a multi-index with the setIndex method in the very next lesson. So I hope you're excited for yet another amazing module with the pandas library, and I'll see you in the very next lesson.